This link is for 4th grade, going along with the story My Brother's Flying Machine. If you go ahead and make sure your Treasures textbook is open to page 734 and 735, this is where we're going to go ahead and begin. Of course, before we get fully started, I'd like to go over the vocabulary words that we've encountered within this unit. Glider. A glider is a very lightweight plane that rides on air currents instead of using a motor. Unstable. If something is unstable, it is unsteady. Wingspan. A bird's or plane's wingspan is the distance between its outer wing tips. Applauded. When something is applauded, it is praised, usually by clapping. Headlines. The headlines of the newspaper article are the titles. Hoisting. If you are hoisting something, you are lifting a heavy object. Assured. When something is assured, it is guaranteed or certain. Sultan, a ruler of some Muslim countries. Cogs, the teeth on the wheels that turn machinery. Baby buggy, a four-wheeled baby carriage that is pushed. And calculations, answers or predictions figured out mathematically. Okay, now with those being said, let's go ahead and take at page 734, let's talk a little bit about the genre that the story is going to entail. The genre this week is narrative nonfiction. A narrative nonfiction article or narrative nonfiction is a story or account about actual persons, living things, situations, or events. So with that being said, this is going to be about real people. And of course, our comprehension strategy this week is author's perspective. As we read through the story, you guys are going to be filling out that author's perspective map, which is actually your practice book, page 209. So if you continue to watch this link with me, we can get this filled out together. Remember that the author's perspective. Identifying the author's perspective involves looking for clues about why the author wrote the piece and how the author feels about the subject. All right, with that being said, the story is My Brother's Flying Machine. It's by Jane Yolen, and the paintings are by Jim Burke. I was 4 years old when Papa brought home a little flying machine. He tossed it into the air right in front of Orv and Will, and they leaped up to catch it. "Is it a bat?" Orv asked, or maybe it was Will. When at last the bat fell to the floor, they gathered it up like some sultan's treasure, marveling at its paper wings, admiring the twisted rubber band that gave it power. I wanted to touch it too, but they would not let me, saying I was too little, though I was but 3 years younger than Orv to that very day. And when the bat broke, they fixed it together, Will directing Orv with his busy hands, tinkering till the toy worked better than when Papa first brought it home. Our older brothers, Rechlan and Lauren, looked down on these activities, but Will was not put off. He made 1, and 2, and 3 more bats, each one bigger than the last. Orv was his constant helper. I stood on tiptoes by the table watching them work. Will shook his head. "On a much larger scale," he said, "the machine fails to work so well." They both were puzzled. They did not know yet that a machine twice as big needs 8 times the power to fly. Okay, now we're going to start with filling out this author's perspective chart, but with this being said, before we can fill in a clue, what special talent does the author think Orv and Will had? Look on page 736 to give you those clues. What special talents does the author think Orv and Will had? Well, the author shows that they had an unusual talent for working with mechanical things. The narrator said that they fixed the broken bat together. She also said that they were able to make it work better than when their father first brought it home. Soon, they had made 3 more bats, and were able to tell why the larger ones didn't work so well. So with that being said, we can go ahead and put here that Will and Orv have unusual mechanical talents. Okay, let's continue to read on. Now after that, Will built sturdy kites which he sold to his pals at school. Orv made a printing press with an old tombstone for a press bed. wheels and cogs from a junkyard, and the fold at the top of my old baby buggy that he had found in the barn. My, it made me smile to see it. Now I'm going to stop right there. I want you to reread the list of items that Orv used to build the printing press. What does it tell you about the kind of person that he was? Okay, he used a tombstone, wheels, cogs, and a baby buggy to all make this printing press. So Orv seems that he's very creative and resourceful when it comes to finding materials and supplies for his inventions. Even if he did not have a lot of money, he still was smart enough and making a working machine out of unexpected items. Let's continue. Papa and Mama applauded their efforts. Orv's press could print 1,000 pages an hour. A printer from the great city of Denver came to visit and climbed under and over Orv's baby buggy press. At last he laughed amazed. Well, it worked, he said, but I certainly don't see how. Orv and Will made many messes, but Mama never complained. She'd always been the one who gave them the hand-building things when they were boys. Poor Papa, he knew God's word well enough, but not knowing how to drive a nail. When dear Mama died of tuberculosis, I took over her role, keeping the house, making the meals, and always giving the boys applause, even after I graduated from college and worked as a teacher. Will and Orv never went on in school. They ran a print press, then a bicycle shop, repairing and making custom-built models they called the Van Cleve and the St. Clair. Theirs was not the biggest bicycle shop in Dayton, but I like to think it was the best. Will and Orv and Will. They worked side by side in the bicycle shop, whistling at the same time, humming the same tune. They even, so Will thought together. Some folks mistook them for twins, though they never looked anything alike. Will had a hawk face and Orv a red mustache. Orv was the neat one. He wore special cuffs for his sleeves and a blue and white striped apron to protect his clothes. But Will, land's sake, he was a mess. I had to remind him that his suit needed pressing, and when his socks didn't match, or find him one of Orv's shirts when he was ready to go off to give a speech. Now, what clue to the author's perspective on Will and Orv can you find on page 740? Let me say that again. What clue to the author's perspective on Will and Orv can you find on page 740? Well, the narrator says she thinks that their bicycle was the best in Dayton. She describes how well they worked together, and even though they were different in many ways, she points out how people mistook them for twins, how they would hum the same tune, and how Will even said that they thought together. So the author thinks that they had a very special kind of partnership. So let's go ahead and add this clue to our author's perspective chart. Will and Orv had a special partnership. The newspapers and magazines were full of stories about people trying to fly. Lilienthal, Pilcher, Chanute, men into birds, the headlines read. I wondered if such a thing were really possible. Orv said, insects, birds, and mammals fly every day at pleasure. It is reasonable to suppose that the man might also fly. Will wrote off to the Smithsonian for all their books and pamphlets in flight. He and Orv studied page after page. The first question they asked was, how can we control the flight? They knew that a bicycle is unstable by itself, yet if it can be controlled by a rider, how much more control would an airplane need? Overhead, buzzards wheeled in the sky, constantly changing the position of their wing to catch the flow of air. Now if birds can do it, Orv mused out loud, so can men. He seemed so certain, I began to believe it, that it could be done. I began to believe it could be done by Will and Orv. Okay, so I'm going to stop there real quick and ask you a quick question. What is the author's perspective about Will and Orville's sister? What do you think the perspective of the sister is? Well, the author shows how she was curious and knowledgeable about technology and about her brother's work. We can see that she's proud of her brothers, and she also supports them because she says that it can be done, and it's going to be done by her brothers. Now, they built their first aircraft right in the bicycle shop. I took over running the place as Mama would have, so they might make their flying machine. The first aircraft's wings spanned a full 5 feet. I measured it out myself. Now, the craft was a pine wood covered with fabric and sealed with a shellac. Like a kite, it was controlled by a set of cords. When it was finished, Orv and I went off on a camping trip with a group of friends, and while we were gone, Will did a sneak. He marched out to a nearby field and flew the glider, watched only by some boys. The thing suddenly swooped down on them, and the boys ate dust that day, I'll tell you. Their first aircraft was a big kite, but a kite is not an airplane. So Will and Orv set about to build it bigger, 16 or 17 feet, large enough to carry a man, but still open to all the elements. Will lay face down on the lower wing, showing me how he planned to fly. I tried to imagine the wind in his face and the dirt and the grass rushing up it to greet him, like an old boar at a party. "Is it safe?" I whispered. He winked at me and smiled and said, "If you are looking for perfect safety, sit on the fence and watch the birds." Dayton, Ohio, where we lived, was not the place to fly the craft. Will and Orv needed somewhere with open space and strong regular breezes. They thought about San Diego, about St. James, Florida, about the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. Now, before we turn the page, using the information in the last paragraph on page 744, what conclusions can you draw about the landscape and the weather patterns of Dayton, Ohio? While to fly their aircraft, the brothers need a place with open spaces and strong regular breezes. If, as the narrator says, Dayton is not such a place, it must not have very many open spaces or wind that blows hard enough or frequently enough. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop this link and we will pick it back up in part 2.